So much back to the waffle iron idea. When a record is pressed, there's a hot hockey puck sized piece of plastic that goes between the two stampers. And the stampers push down with a bunch of pressure and the plastic spreads outward, much like waffle batter, and you get some runoff. There's a blade that trims that off, but I snagged those out of the press before that trimming blade came over just because they look cool, you know.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hello, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and I created this show to introduce you to real-world recording professionals, to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can take your records to the next level and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is a superstar, Cameron Henry, a mastering engineer at Welcome to 1979 Studio, specializing in vinyl mastering. He has mastered over 2,000 LP and 45 single releases, including Bela Fleck, John Mayer, Sturgill Simpson, Bonnie Raitt, J.D. McPherson, Spiritualized, Steve Earle, Dinosaur Jr., John Prine, The Rolling Stones. Did I just say The Rolling Stones? Nice, man. Whitney Houston, all right, and many others. And since Cameron's mastering room is located in a full-on recording studio, Cameron and studio owner Chris Mara have also been able to record direct-to-disc releases for artists such as Pete Townsend, Josh Hoyer, and a handful of others. One of the very cool things that Cameron also does here is to host a vinyl camp at Welcome to 1979 Studio, which is focused on teaching the basics of disc cutting with hands-on demonstrations using attendees' music and a chance to participate in an actual direct-to-disc recording session. The goal of the camp is to provide knowledge to mixing engineers and producers so they can have the foresight to properly prepare an album for a vinyl release. I'm really psyched to have Cameron Henry with us today on Recording Studio Rockstars and to be coming to you straight from the Vinyl Mastering Lab here at Welcome to 1979 Studio. Cameron, are you ready to rock, dude?
Totally ready to rock.
Totally ready
to rock.
Awesome, dude. Well, I've introduced you. Can you introduce yourself also in your own words and tell us more about who you are?
Sure. Well, I'm a Nashville transplant from Ohio. I moved here about 10 years ago. And the vinyl mastering, which is what I've done for the last 4 or 5 years, came about really organically and was never a plan, you know, just...
You didn't wake up one morning and you're like, I'm going to be a vinyl mastering engineer.
No, actually, of all the things I've ever dreamed of becoming in my life, vinyl mastering engineer was not even one of them, you know?
Yeah, no, I noticed you're wearing a Ghostbusters shirt today.
Yeah, totally.
That was a little bit more of the dream, like you wanted to bust some ghosts?
That's actually a really interesting point you brought up, and it wasn't planned. 2 or 3 years ago, I got a call from an A&R rep at Sony Records, and he was asking if, you know, had done any remastering work, and I said, yeah. And he's like, well, I'm going to send you something. I want to just get a reference disc cut and we'll see if we like it. And he sends me the Ghostbuster master because it needed to get reissued for the 30th anniversary release.
Wow. So what does that mean? When you say he sent you the Ghostbusters master, is he sending you film? Is he sending you digital files?
Just for the soundtrack.
Okay.
Like a reissue of the original motion picture soundtrack, you know? So getting that call that was like, who are you going to call? That's what he said to me on the phone.
Yeah.
And I was so stoked because Ghostbusters for me as a kid was like the movie I'd watch every day, you know? And I had the outfit and the toys and everything because, you know, I was born in 83, like Ghostbusters were my childhood.
You know, what else is funny is my daughter she's been watching epic rap battles in the car on my iPhone on the way to school in the morning. This morning, it was Ghostbusters versus like, I don't know who it was, Santa Claus or something.
Awesome. Yeah. Ghostbusters.
Right on. Well, good segue there. Good.
Yeah, that kind of
good tangent. All right. So tell us more about, you know, the process of bringing, you know, they deliver you a soundtrack to master. And that just shows up in an email or, somebody comes, does an armored truck drive something over here for you to do it? Well,
I mean, music comes to me in all different ways. I have the ability to cut from a digital source in the room. Also, I have a Studer tape machine that allows me to cut directly from an analog tape as well, either a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. And Sometimes I receive mixes. Sometimes I receive tracks that have already been mastered. Sometimes I receive, which is the ultimate way, a set of mixes and a set of digital masters, and work from the mixes, and make a new master for vinyl and just use the digital master as a reference.
Nice.
Because mastering for vinyl is completely different than it is for digital. Completely isn't the right word, but mastering has a chain. There's a start where you start mastering, and there's an end point. And the end point is whatever format it's going to be. So if it's a CD, it's making a CD. There's a point maybe 3/4 of the way through the mastering process where vinyl could take a completely different path from digital. And a lot of that has to do with dynamics, and overall volume. Digital music is way louder than vinyl. It's a totally different reference point. Yeah,
but you want to turn your vinyl records up louder.
That's true. Yeah. Well, and dynamic music fits on a record better. The physicality of how a record works. You have a disc and there's a spiral going around and around, and the more that groove deviates and moves around, then the more space each instance of the groove is required. So you can only fit so much time. So the louder the music is, the more space the groove's going to use up. The quieter it is, the less space. So when you have dynamic music, in the quieter moments, you can cram the grooves together. So over time, with a less compressed master, you have an overall higher volume output. And it can and it's more dynamic, so it sounds better.
So if the less loud your final master is that's delivered to you to be cut onto vinyl, the more flexibility you have to fit more of it onto the vinyl record.
Correct. Yeah. Wow. I mean, and there's always it's like a parabola. Like there's a parabola effect where you have enough compression and limiting where if the overall RMS volume of your record is solid enough, but a vinyl master and a digital master aren't optimized in the same way. Something that would make a CD sound great and loud and aggressive will make your record sound weak and quiet.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, what if my music sucks? Can you still fit a lot of that on the record?
I can put bad music on a record. I am talented enough to do that.
Right on. Well, we're going to get more into this. I know, rock stars, this could be, you're probably like massively excited to be hearing about this. And at the same time, it's still already super confusing. So we'll break it down a little bit more. Cameron, you want to start us off with some sort of inspirational quote, something to kind of get us excited about launching into this interview? Other than I'm already excited. I mean, we're talking about Ghostbusters, too.
So a quote that has always stuck with me, and I think I actually heard it from Chris initially, and it was when I made a mistake. And he told me, experience is something you get right after you needed it. Right. And it's true, So I've always used that when I have a moment in my life where I'm like, oh, I should have done it this way. And I'm like, now I know going forward how to do it that way. So I've actually learned something in that failure, and it keeps me from drinking too much.
All right. So now give us, like in a paragraph, a description of what you do here. I mean, what is this? What is your, maybe describe what we're sitting next to, and tell us just quickly speaking what it is.
So in the room here, I have a Neumann VMS 70 cutting lathe, which is a giant spaceship looking machine that cuts what's called a lacquer. And that's the first record. Yeah, it's got giant glowing buttons on it. It's a pretty sexy looking machine.
Have you guys shot a retro sci-fi movie in here yet?
We totally could.
Yeah,
I mean, it looks like the Spaceball ship's like control center.
So rockstars, imagine taking all your laundry machines and refrigerators and stuff and just kind of packing them all together and then setting it in your control room. It's akin to that.
Yeah, it's a big hot machine that does one thing really, really well, which is just cut a record. So the process of making a vinyl record starts with a machine like mine. The music is pumped into the amplifiers of the machine. It vibrates the cutting stylus on the cutter head, and it just literally in real time cuts the groove onto a lacquer. And a lacquer looks a lot like a record. It's an aluminum disc with a coating of like nail polish on it. It's really soft. I think it smells really awesome. And it cuts this first record, and that gets sent to a manufacturing plant where it gets nickel plated. And so when they peel off the nickel from the record that has grooves on it, the metal part has ridges on it. It's the opposite of a record. And that goes into the press, which is a complicated looking waffle iron, and hot plastic sits between your two stampers and just presses out every copy. So whatever record I cut in here is going to be identical to every record copy that's out on the market.
It is essentially a giant record player in reverse, kind of like
Absolutely.
in the same way that a microphone is a speaker in reverse.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a transducer. Yeah, that's actually a great point. Like the cutting stylus on the lathe cuts the groove and is vibrated by the music, so that when you put your playback needle on your turntable into that groove, it vibrates the same way. So yeah, inherently this is the microphone. My lathe is the microphone and your turntable is the speaker.
Yeah. So you ever stick your finger underneath the cutting lathe by accident? What happens then?
I've never done that, but I have laughed too loud. There was a really cool big record that I cut and mastered, and I got test pressings in, and the test pressing is, after they go to the plant, they make 5-6 copies and send them off, and you listen for manufacturing defects. And, I'm listening to the record and everybody else has approved it, and I'm listening. And at the fade out at the end of the last song, I'm like, who's laughing in this? And I turn the volume way up and I'm like, that's me laughing. So something must have happened right outside my door as I was finishing cutting the record, and I was too close to the cutter head and it vibrated.
Wow. Well, clearly I must have been here interviewing you and saying some funny things on a podcast.
It must have been you. So I blame Liz.
Right. You can blame me. I'm here. Throw me under the bus.
Ironically. And then I decided not to say anything about it because everybody else approved it, the vinyl gods are pretty rough. I found when you have a record and there's like these tiny little insignificant flaws and you try, it's like you're chasing perfection, which is impossible. Like making records is trying to get this perfect thing that never skips or not skips, but like never has any noise on it. Like it sounds like a CD. Like that's the goal, but you never actually get there.
That's fascinating. Right. So it's kind of akin to getting the performance out of a band. If you keep pushing for it too much, you probably just make a pile of junk. Yeah.
Or like you try so hard to fix one little insignificant thing that you cause 3 other problems later down the road. So it's one of those worlds, like making vinyl records, and there's obviously thresholds of like what is acceptable and what is not.
Well, so The Laugh is a great story, and it's kind of a good story of a sort of failure that was pretty cool. But give us another story about sort of like a failure for you, maybe in your illustrious vinyl mastering career that turned out to be a great learning lesson for you.
Well,
I'll let the water gods are rushing through.
That's actually my tears.
That's really great.
Well, I think opportunities are born out of failures, and the opportunity for me to do vinyl mastering was born out of, I guess it was definitely a failure in the sense it was a negative thing, not a positive thing. But, 6 years ago, I was engineering bands and producing records with bands. And the first vinyl record I ever worked on came across my desk. Like, we're going to send this out for vinyl manufacturing. I was like, oh, great. I'm going to hear the music that I produced and mixed on a vinyl record for the first time. And we got the masters done. They sounded great. And then I knew nothing about the production of vinyl. I'm like, we'll just send it off to manufacturing. As far as I knew, a record press was like you put a USB stick in it and records pop out of it. Like I had no idea how this worked.
I think Chris had like a similar comment about it.
Oh, yeah. Great. Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. And so the test pressings came back and they sounded bad to me. They didn't sound as good as the masters for a lot of reasons. They sounded thin. They sound very mid-rangey, all these things. So I reached out and said, these don't sound right, and the person that did the cutting and mastering just kind of patted me on the head, said, just how vinyl is, don't worry about it, which really ticked me off. And we couldn't get that record resolved, and it came out that way because, the label was like, we got to get records out by this date, so we got to live with it, I remember coming to the studio and telling Chris about that going on, and he was like, I just had the same thing happen to me. And so out of that failure, started researching what this process is and just came to the conclusion we need to just get one of these and do it ourselves then.
Right.
That's the only way we can fix it. And so we did.
It's kind of like going down to Walmart and picking up a PlayStation. I mean, it's that easy.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, totally. It's like, go to the lathe store.
Yeah. So now this giant machine of which I've seen a total of 1 in my life. How do you find something like this? There must be a story behind getting a cutting lathe.
Yeah, well, the final decision was made to go ahead and get one, and it was like another 2 years before one was actually found. And there isn't a store or a broker or a company. It's kind of just guys and emails, and
You don't just go to the cutting lathe factory where they're making these every day?
No. I mean, it took a lot of guidance and research, just to get in touch with the right people and have the right people to, because not only is it a hard thing to find, but there's all like anything that's extremely technical engineering wise. When you don't know anything about it, how do you know what's good and what's not? What kind of, like, it's like, imagine going to a planet or imagine never knowing what a car was. And then you have to go all of a sudden buy a car. And it's like, I don't even know like what a good car is versus a bad car.
I think a lot of listeners might feel that way at times about plugins and DAWs and mixes and other stuff, So I totally know what you mean.
And it was tough for us because, being Chris and I both being engineers, we have a pretty good grasp on like tape machines and software and mixing consoles and signal flow and all those things. And then none of that information translates to this cutting lathe. It's its own independent entity. So we had no clue, but there was a mastering engineer in town that really championed us getting one. And
that was Hank Williams?
That was Hank Williams at Master Mix. And he helped guide us to what we were looking for, and once we got it in and got it installed, the manual is written in a way that assumes you already know how to cut records. So here's just what the new features are for this model. So I'm like, it's like to cut a record, start by turning it on and cutting a record. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So
now, did he sing the instructions to you, or it's not that Hank Williams?
Not that Hank Williams. No, not that Hank Williams. But he would come over in the evening and we would look at records under the microscope, and he'd show me how the machine worked and then leave me be. And I'd spend 2 weeks just cutting things. And then he'd come back over and say, well, you should do this instead of that, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then eventually, after a couple of months of just spending 14 hours a day on the machine, I was like, well, I should be good enough to put something out in the world. Like, say I'm doing it, at least put it on the website, open for business.
Well, it's funny. I had a similar experience with vinyl too, because I would do records with bands, and then they would go out and have it pressed, and it'd come back and I'd hear it, or they'd send me a copy, or I'd do something with a buddy who maybe wasn't an engineer, and he'd be all excited and send me the 45, and I'd always put him on. I'm like, this sounds terrible.
Right.
What happened?
Yeah. And some things do. I mean, it's electromechanical playback. It's not like digital where it sounds the exact same. You just play it. It has to be able to physically be playable. And a lot of times things that you do with audio won't cut. I mean, you can cut anything, but you can't always play back what was cut, So
right. You mean you can cut a groove that's got giant bass on it or something, but you can't necessarily play that back.
Yeah. Or like out of phase. I mean, not to get too technical on it, but a record is cut in a mid-side fashion where all of your center image information is causing a lateral horizontal groove to be cut on the record. And anything stereo is happening vertically. So when you have a big out of phase moment, like maybe a synth or a bass, or even you have a huge bass or a kick drum even, that you had room mics on that are delayed, that's out of phase information. And so now your kick drum is actually causing some vertical motion. And that vertical motion will cause a skip because it's like a ramp.
Well, so listeners, Rockstars, Cameron is actually bouncing his finger up and down in the air as he's trying to demonstrate that. So imagine the needle of your record leaping in and out of the record itself and just trying to jump off the record.
Yeah, the cutting, if you looked at a record groove under the microscope, it's a V-shaped groove, and think of it like it's just like a river basin or something, and it's just literally carving this canyon into the
that makes perfect sense. Now, it's actually the first time I really understood that, the way you explained it. So it seems much more logical that the needle would have an easy time going side to side, which is the center info, the mono info. So if you've got powerful stuff and powerful transients, it's easier to do that. But the stuff that's happening only in the left or right speakers is the needle trying to jump up and down.
It's moving
much harder.
And it's harder because there's gravity now involved. Because the upward motion and the downward motion is a totally different thing.
It's like X Games in your
it totally is. It totally is like X Games. Yeah.
All right. So now share with us a real moment of success for you, something where maybe in the vinyl mastering where it all just came together and you were just like, wow, I can't believe that just happened.
A real success for me was, cutting my first album, like mastering and cutting my first album and then getting a copy of it in, the mail. It was like such an awesome feeling, to be like, here's one that I did. I've been spending months learning how this machine works. Someone finally hired me to do it and it worked out great, that was one of like the happiest days, ever. That's for awesome. Me. Yeah. It was cool.
Any anecdotes from that moment? Did you leap up and down? Did you guys go out for a beer or at least, or lunch or something?
Yeah. I went out and celebrated and we actually, took the test pressing. I went and bought the album, like I went out and bought it. And that was a problem for me at first. Like I was just barely making money doing this, and the money I'd make doing it, I'd run out to the store in 3 months and buy a copy of every record I did, like I have, because I was so stoked about it. Yeah. Then I realized like, oh, this is kind of counterintuitive to the sense of
the marketing results here.
But, I got that framed. Like I have the album framed and have it hanging up just to be like, that was the first one.
Now I noticed you have what looks like another or a couple of test pressings framed up on the wall. Is that what those are? Is that actually from your cut?
These are records. And if you were able to see them, listeners, they look like a record with a bunch of plastic hanging off the edges, like bigger than the record would be. And those are pressings that were pulled off of the press. So much back to the waffle iron idea. When a record is pressed, there's a hot hockey puck size piece of plastic that goes between the two stampers. And the stampers push down with a bunch of pressure and the plastic spreads outward, much like waffle batter. And you get some runoff, much like waffle batter runoff. And there's a blade that trims that off, but I snagged those out of the press before that trimming blade came over just because they look cool,
And just because you're daring, you just like to stick your fingers in the press when the cutting edge is coming around.
Automated machines don't scare me.
Okay, cool. So, and those are just, those aren't particular records, the story themselves more so the process of making them.
There are a couple that I was really proud of. There were a series of records I cut for an old jazz label called Bethlehem out of New York. And there were some records that I actually really liked. And that was very early on. And I was like, I really want to snag copies of these and have them hang up because they're really kind of special to me, But I still have a whole catalog of test pressings. I've been really good about every test pressing I get, cataloging it, writing down what it is and saving them because that's sort of all I have to document the work I've done. I don't have files saved on a hard drive. Those test pressings are it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the live to disc stuff that you do too, because that process is just so exciting already. I kind of think of that as a real success. And you can say no to this. I believe, did you tell me that you had done that with Pete Townsend?
Yeah, we did that with Pete
Townsend. Are you allowed
Townsend.
to talk about it? Do you want to tell some stories about that?
So direct to disc, first of all, if anyone doesn't understand what that is a very old recording method, even before tape machines, meaning that the band is performing live. It's getting mixed live in the control room, and the mixed stereo output is being sent to me, and I'm mastering it live, and I'm cutting the record live. So when the band, it's a lot of live things happening. So when the band is done playing, their master record is created and ready to go to manufacturing. There's no going back and mixing. There's no going back anything. So it's,
going forward now.
It is
records on the
is.
shelves, baby.
Yeah, that's it. That's
so wild. And so tell us about some of the benefits of cutting live. Obviously, the limitations are pretty clear.
Sure.
If you mess up, that's on there for good. But that's not the point, is it?
Right. Well,
tell us about
the first time we did it, actually the guy who restored the lathe said, if you guys take a chance, you should record to this. It'll blow your mind. And we were like, okay. So we have some friends that are studio musicians that we sort of throw on sessions when they need to be. We bribed them all with pizza and wine one night and said, if you guys just jam, let us record it direct to disc just to see, like, is this something we can actually physically pull off, And we got the discs done and went upstairs to listen to it, and the sound blew us away. Like, for anybody that's ever worked in a studio with a console and big monitors, there's always that sound of input You know, when you're not listening back from any medium, you're just hearing the band through the microphones, through the console, to the speakers. There's no tape. There's no digital. And then whenever you listen back, it's never the same as input. I don't know what it is. It's like a depth thing. But when we listened back to the disc, it sounded just like input. It was mind-blowing how good it sounded.
So Rockstars, an analogy for you, because you're most likely, many of you may be using a DAW, and you know you've got a interface that's going into it, and you can't really replicate that by taking mics into the interface. But if you have outboard mic preamps, for example, and let's say you also have some kind of volume knob that's between your DAW and your speakers, if you can take a mic signal from out in your studio, out on the floor, and come out of the mic pre's, go straight to your volume knob, straight to your speakers, that's going to show you that difference in sound. And it's worth trying one day, because it can really blow your mind.
Yeah, it's really, but
be careful you don't blow your speakers.
Yeah, that's true. And so like, that's why it seems to be worth it to do the direct to disc, is the final product sounds so damn cool. And everything else is really kind of a nightmare about it in a way. You can't overdub, you can't remix, you can't make an adjustment, you can't do any of that. If you're playing a whole side, like on an LP, if it's 4 songs, you have to play all 4 songs in a row in real time, because once the disc starts cutting, you can't stop. You know, so those have been really cool. We've done these LPs, the band is set up, and we'll have an intern stationed to, you know, like switch guitars if need be, or you know, have different vocal mics set up on different keyboards if the singer's moving from one to the other. You know, it's kind of like a mixture of live and recording. You know, it's really more like putting on a live show.
Have you guys done video to go along with that yet?
A few times they've been videotaped, or there have been documentarians that have put some things out. I believe Josh Hoyer and the Soul Colossal Cooked Raw album was that way. And what's most interesting to me about doing direct-to-disc, because even though there's all these daunting limitations that seem unsurmountable, when we go upstairs to listen to the takes, everybody is listening to the music as a piece of music, as opposed to the normal recording situation where the whole band goes up and they're listening to their parts and they're listening for mistakes, as opposed to just listening to see if the music is cool. You know, I think flipping that mindset makes everybody better. And I have heard, like, something like Josh Hoyer, for example, they played some songs that had been on other albums and some other new songs, and they felt more like a live, honest band doing that way, because they just had to play together. They couldn't go back and fix things. You know, we're hearing players say, I just kind of kept it simple because I didn't want to be the one that screwed up. So I just did what worked over and over again, you know? And it's like, that's how people used to make records, was like a band just made a good sound in the room they were in, as opposed to just doing everything piecemeal.
And not only that, but the way that people used to make records is you had to make a good sound in a room over and over, also because they didn't have record presses initially, right?
Yeah.
With the old 78s, the band just had to perform it, and they'd have like 10
cones set up everywhere.
Cones set up in the room that were actually cutting lathes that were cutting individual copies of the record.
Yeah. Wow. And then after they perform the song, they load them up with 10 new blanks and play the song again.
Right. You know? So if they wanted 100 copies of the record, they'd have to play the song 10 times.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is awesome.
Copies.
Yeah. And then every copy of those is its own individual thing, because it's a specific performance from that specific angle. You know, I mean, it's awesome.
So Rockstars, you can probably hear, I told you we're in the studio, literally in the live studio, you can hear like water rushing through, or the coffee grinder going in the background. And I think somebody's playing guitar, which is pretty cool.
I mean,
it's happening right now.
This building is its like own little, like we don't like to use the word like one-stop shop, because it's really kind of dishonest, but we just have a lot of things going on, which is really cool, because we're not all focused on one thing. Like, we don't have to compromise anything. You know, if I'm doing disc cutting, I can do things the way I want to do them, that I think is right, and not have to focus on the monetary implications of that as much, because it's a multi-headed dragon in the building, you know? So everything can be uncompromised, you know? So
I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a moment, because you said you can't do overdubs, but remember those days when we used to have dual cassette decks, and you would take the cassette, you record to one with your voice and your guitar, and then you'd flip the cassettes and play one to the other. And I see you've got a turntable in here. So I wonder if you could like play back your test pressing and play along with it and overdub and cut another one and just do a series of those.
You could totally do that. You could totally do that. But it kind of defeats the purpose. Yeah, totally. Yeah, you could totally do that, which I haven't done, but now I kind of want to see how it
I planted an idea.
Yeah.
All right. So now tell us something you're real excited about right now here in the mastering lab.
Well, over the years, this started as a part-time kind of when it needed to be done thing. And now it's full-time, and it's been that way for a few years, and I'm cutting records every day. I actually cut 3 this morning already. The next step after cutting a lacquer is doing electroplating. For years, I assumed that was just a mechanical manufacturing process. And as vinyl sales have grown, some of my major label clients have had to send projects to multiple pressing plants simultaneously in order to get enough physical copies made. So I'd be cutting 5 copies, identical copies of the master, and sending them off to 5 different pressing plants. And the test pressings would come back sounding different from all 5 plants because the different electroplating processes affect the audio. Yeah. So we are adding a electroplating facility in-house here, which will be up and running in the next couple of months.
Now, I don't want to wish anything bad on you, Cameron, but I'm already having this vision of like some weird, green chemical accident that happens, and it causes you to gain your super electroplating vinyl mastering powers. And I'm just thinking, in the Ghostbusters shirt, it's got me imagining, what's your superhero character to look like?
Ooh, that's a great question. There's so many I think I'd rather just be like a Ninja Turtle. I'll just be a Ninja Turtle.
Right on, man.
Yeah, I guess they're superheroes.
Well, you've been pretty superhero lately. I know you've been taking up like marathon running, right?
Yeah. Running has been a new thing for the last year. So
you getting ready to go do your first marathon?
I'm doing my first half marathon later next month.
Any parallels between taking on a career in vinyl mastering and taking on marathon running?
Yeah, definitely. Or just anything in general. If you have a goal, don't focus too much on the end of that goal. Just focus on like, what can I do right now, to eventually move me in the direction of that goal. Like if I'm trying to get to California from Nashville and I don't have a map, I'm okay. I don't have to think about how I'm going to get to the specific location in California. I just need to head west. Right. And then as you get closer and closer, you can fine tune it a little more. For me, it was just, can I run around the block, And then it's like, okay, well, the next day I did that pretty well. I think I'll run a little further. And then, it eventually just built up to the thing of running a half marathon.
Right. And same thing with the vinyl mastering. Yeah. When you guys just decided you thought you could do it.
Yeah.
You talked to an expert.
Yeah.
So that helped, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you would have gotten into this if you didn't have the guidance of an expert like Hank?
It would have been a lot slower. I got to know a few guys that do this in other parts of the country. There's only a handful of people that really do it. And, the newer guys that jumped on were like, yeah, it took me a few years to get up and running, but they were learning in a vacuum. Having Hank really got me from 0 to 60 pretty quick. It wouldn't have been impossible, but it would have been a lot slower.
All right. So I know one of the big questions, and I think you began to answer it, but let's dig in a little bit more because I've tried to ask this question myself. I've seen our listeners ask this question in our Facebook group, but what should they know about mixing for vinyl or mastering for vinyl? It's like that question of, I'm finishing my record, we want to do vinyl. What am I supposed to do now to make sure that it's going to work?
Sure. Well, a couple of basic things. One, make sure your music sounds good. If it sounds good as a mix.
But you said if my music sucks, you can still put
it can still sound good.
That's just me, guys.
Yeah.
Your music sounds great.
But I mean, if your music sounds good, it's probably going to translate well to vinyl. The 2 things that I check before I even really get a chance to dig into anything is listening to the low end and making sure that it is in phase and actually in the middle. And I check sibilance because those are the 2 frequency ranges that cause the most trouble in a record.
And is sibilance what sounds to us like an acceptable sibilance in the digital world? Do we have to have less of that for vinyl, or is it just don't have too much?
That's the thing, is a lot of a lot of what I know, the thresholds of this machine and this technology from using it every day. It's a really hard thing to explain in a way of saying this is enough, this is not enough, That's why we do our little vinyl camp that you mentioned earlier, is we give people a chance to come in with their music and we can cut it as is. We'll cut the song as is on a disc and play it back, and we'll just hear as is. This is what it sounds like. And it might skip and it might distort here. It might not, and then it's like, okay, let's go back and look. And this is what I would do if I was mastering it to make this sound better. So it's not so much intended for people to learn how to cut records, because it's just not feasible, because there's not a lot of these things around, but if you understand this process, it'll make you better in the mixing stage and the mastering stage, if that makes sense.
And then what about, so, you work with clients all the time. They're sending you stuff from all around the world to cut vinyl. What's part of your process? Obviously, they're not always coming to Vinyl Camp just before each record they send you.
Yeah.
So is there a little bit of a back and forth to check the sibilance, check the bass phase or something?
Oh, yeah. A lot of times I'm sent a mix or a master, and I work on it and see if I can get it to fit on a disc. And there are points where I say, I'm gonna have to change this too drastically. I should go back to whoever the last person to touch the music was and give them an opportunity to at least, or a producer or an artist, whoever it is, and say, look, this is what's gonna have to happen. Do you want me to do that? Or do you want to go back and revisit the mix, and at least they make an educated decision. But once I think I'm ready to cut a disc, because getting the music to fit on the record is the hardest part, whether it'll physically fit based on how long the record is or whatever. And there's usually more than one way to solve any problem on the medium. If it's a long side that has a lot of low end on it, well, I can either turn the overall volume down, or I could remove the low frequencies, and it'll still be at an ample volume. And my predisposition is to say, everybody has a volume knob. I don't care about volume. Vinyl's not on the radio. It's not playlisted. You put the record on, you turn the volume up to where it sounds good, and then the rest of the record is fine. But some people it's really important that their record sounds as loud as another record. So sometimes we have to take frequencies out. So it's a subjective thing. So I set everything up and I cut what's called a reference disc, which is a 12-inch lacquer that doesn't get sent off to manufacturing, gets sent to the client, and they put it on their turntable at home and listen to it. And they say, I wish there was more bass in. I'm like, cool, let me put more bass in. This is what it's going to sound like now. And once they're happy with that, then I cut the masters identically and send those off to the plant.
Now, I know that there's a step in there that I should ask you about now, because before you go and make a change, what tips do you have for people about making sure that their turntable is playing back correctly? Because that's a big part of the process, right?
Oh, sure. Well, don't use a turntable that's plastic, and like those little suitcase turntables are great for playing records because you can tape a nickel to the head of them or whatever, but they're not good for playing lacquers or really records in general. They're cheap. There's a whole system for aligning your playback cartridge, and there are great resources online for looking for that. But what's most important is what your downward tracking force is, meaning on your tone arm, how much downward force is the needle has on the record. There's a little counterweight at the other end of the tone arm, and you can kind of turn it. And if you turn it too much, it won't even go down. It'll just stay up in the air. But every playback cartridge manufacturer has their setting of how much downward force there is. And I have all the tools here at the studio. Unfortunately, not everybody can get to Nashville, but I know a lot of people in Nashville. They're like, I'm not sure if my turntable's set up, and I just have them come over and we set their turntable up before they listen to their reference discs.
Right on. But so if somebody is still, using a plastic suitcase turntable to enjoy their records at home, and they're getting excited about vinyl, that's not to dissuade you from considering pressing vinyl. You definitely can get a great record, and it'll sound great on your suitcase too.
Yeah.
Well, it's just that's not the place to check it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, when they get their first record made, they kind of learn how their turntable sounds because they all have a sound, that can be tough as well. I have a turntable here that's fairly flat, and I was going through different decks and different cartridges that gave me a really flat response. It's not really a fun response, but it's relatively flat. So when I cut a reference disc, before I even send it out in the mail, I put it on my turntable directly after cutting it and listen to it here. and digitally record the playback off of the phono preamp. So there's a digital capture of what your reference disc sounded like on my turntable that I email right away. So there's something that's super easy for anyone to pull up. And, sometimes bands are on the road, or, there's a band is here and the producer is in another town and the label's somewhere else. They can all hear what it sounded like on my turntable.
And I bet bands still like get that digital version that came off the turntable and go, holy shit, dude, that sounds so awesome.
Yeah, they do. Or I'll get a call that says, hey, I got the reference discs and they sound really dark and distorted. And I say, well, did you listen to the files? And they'll say, no, we'll go listen to those. And they're like, wow, the files sounded great, but this doesn't. And they realize their turntable was,
just messed up.
Yeah. And then the next email is like, do you have a turntable you could recommend? It's like, great,
Yeah, there you go.
But that's part of the process of learning. Vinyl's a really weird medium because there's no definition of what anything is. Like I can master any way I want, but I have no idea what turntable it's going to be listened on. It's going to be listened on a million different things. There's no standards, so much.
It's unlike in the digital world where you could master for iTunes and master for CD and everybody's laptop. You can't do a master for great turntables and master for bad turntables.
Yeah. I mean, it's another, we all understand that with speakers, you get 5 sets of speakers and switch between them and they all sound completely different. Yeah. You're adding another piece to that equation, which is just your playback deck, but that's part of the fun too.
All right. So where do you see vinyl going in the next 5 years? It's really taken off these days. Right?
It is. And it doesn't,
no sign of slowing down, son.
It doesn't. I mean, it keeps being called a fad and then growing and growing and growing.
Wait, I heard that once when I was growing up in the 80s. They were saying that about rap and hip hop. That's what it was.
Oh, yeah. Is that still going on?
I think that might still be going on at this point.
Yeah. Vinyl's an interesting thing. And people ask me constantly, like, does it sound better? Like it must, because that's why people are buying it. And it's like, I think that's kind of missing the point. Like,
Hold on, let me answer that question for you.
Yeah.
Yes, it does, man. It sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
it
sounds awesome. Vinyl is it's kind of impractical in ways. It's bulky, it's heavy, it takes a lot to manufacture. It's heavy, it's not portable. I might have said all these things again, but it has seen the birth and death of every format that was intended to replace it. I don't know. That answer enough is why vinyl is viable.
Something about it too. It's physical. It's actually like it's like, I don't know. It's like a drawing of music.
Yeah. And you own it. If I download something, I'm not owning the music because I can't sell it. You don't own it if you can't sell it.
Also, there's the act of listening when you listen to vinyl. You intentionally pull the record out of the sleeve, carefully lay it on the turntable, break out your brush. Maybe you've got that little D4 drippy stuff you put on your brush and you kind of like wind it through and then your buddy tells you how to brush it better and you tell him how to brush it better.
Yeah.
And then you listen to the record.
And because it requires effort, you end up listening to the whole thing because you got to go over there and stop it to skip around songs. So you start listening to albums and
more time to pack your bong, when
totally.
You listen to the 12-inch
totally. I mean, we got 15 minutes to kill. But I mean, the biggest demographic of people purchasing these records are people that grew up with Napster, right? So the generation that had the easiest way to access music because they didn't even need, all they needed to have was a computer and an internet connection. That was it. They could get whatever they wanted. Are the people that are now spending money to buy physical copies.
Yeah, interesting. Music. It's like this is the next level. You get the music for free, for them, from their experience, and then you want to experience.
And there's value to it. Like I loved CDs, and I not that I hate CDs, but like I remember the day that a CD burner was a thing that somebody I knew had, and all of a sudden the value that I placed just mentally on my CDs disappeared. I used to have them like cataloged and like kept the covers and like all that stuff. And then when it was like, oh, I can just go get a burned disc of this or whatever, I stopped caring, right? I think there's something to ownership that is a draw. And like going to a record store and like thumbing through like, oh, I love this album. I'm totally going to buy this one, and then you have it forever. And that's your copy.
Definitely thumbing through the vinyl stacks is different than thumbing through CDs. And you can't thumb through MP3s really.
Yeah. And I'm not against any format. Like I'm a multi-format consumer and I think most people are. Like I have a Spotify account. I use Pandora. I download things from iTunes. I buy records.
Wait, you don't play records in the car? Hey,
Yeah.
you know that existed, didn't
I know.
it?
I've seen the thing. You know,
But can you tell us what that was?
it was some kind of deck you pulled out, and it was some suspension turntable that would play through your car. And I can't imagine it ever actually working.
Tubes too, right?
Right? Why not? And you know, but I never. Well, you don't think about it as like, what do you do with your records? Because you take your records and put them in the seat next to you, and then you stop, you know, at McDonald's and get a quarter pounder, and in the July sun, and then your records melted. You know,
well,
it's
so
like
there was a Nashville native, John Hartford, had a great song that was called. Well, what was the title? I think it was just "Don't Keep Your Records in the Sun." It was like, "Don't leave your records in the sun, or they'll warp and they won't be good for anyone."
Yeah. Another John Hartford plug. He has this record called Aeroplane. That's probably one of the coolest records of all time.
Nice.
It's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Nice. Well, he actually went to school with my mom and my uncle.
Oh, wow.
High school.
See connections everywhere.
Connections, man. It's all about connections. All right. So now let's stay on the cool tip here for just a sec. What was one of the coolest looking records you ever saw? Because records can be made. That's one thing you can't really do with an MP3 is you can't change the way it gets delivered to you and looks. But records, you can have them green, red, striped.
You can do whatever. There are some artists at a record plant in Cleveland, Ohio. And I don't know for sure, but I know that they work at the plant, but I think they were employees at the plant before they started doing this, but they have found cool ways to make images that will be created on records, you know, by placing the little pellets of plastic into the hockey puck before it gets expanded out. So you look at this thing and it just looks like the little puck, they look like tiny, tiny little Hershey Kisses, the plastic pellets. And they get formed into this puck, and when they expand out, there's a picture. And they were making records that looked like jack-o'-lanterns, you know, that were super rad, you know, stuff like that. Those are really cool to me.
I remember at one of the recording summits here, you can remind me who it was that was talking about this, but there was a story about making records that were hollow in the middle and had human blood in them. Do you remember hearing about that?
Yeah. That was, I think that was the Flaming Lips. My friend,
that's about right.
A friend of mine, I think they had to extract the blood from all of the artists in the band in his kitchen because of health reasons. They couldn't do it at the plant and inject them into the records. Yeah, so there's a lot of weird ones out there. You know?
Yeah, so you can have a lot of fun with this. And if you're making music and you're making records, if you're an artist or a band and you just want to provide something really valuable for your fans, I mean, this is a great way to go.
And I have fun with the machine. There's a small record label that a friend of mine has, and we worked together on some releases. And we did a baseball game record that was a 7-inch. And I found, you know, normally your groove is just one big spiral. But I kind of found a way to trick the lathe into doing multiple grooves. So there's 5 grooves on this record that are in parallel to one another, never running into each other. So depending on where you set the needle down will depend on which spiral you're going to hear. And then, you know, you put the record on and set it down and the crowd noise comes up, and then an at-bat in baseball happens. And it's either going to be an out or a home run or a single or whatever. So you can literally sit there and play. It's like a video game, but a vinyl.
That's very cool.
You can sit there and play a baseball game.
It's like a choose your own ending.
Kind
story,
of. Yeah. It's like a choose your own adventure record kind of thing. Yeah. Which isn't an idea that I came up with, but kind of revitalized. And every year we've put out one little weird game record.
I like that. It would probably be expensive to make, but I can see a box set record. Then it's got like, you know, 12 records in it or 20 records in it. And depending on, you know, which groove you end up in, it chooses an ending. And that's like, go to record number 7.
Yeah. Well, we have a few ideas for it. We've kind of got, we don't want to keep reinventing the same thing, pulling the lever. It's like we did football, we did baseball. We don't want to just do another sport. We want to take it the next level, which we've got some ideas. But yeah, the label is called The Plural of Vinyl is Vinyl. And if you go to the website, you can kind of check out the releases we have. And, you know, if you're nerdy about record collecting, there's some cool stuff on there. We're
getting ready to take a break here, and then we'll come back for the last bit, the jam session. Is there anything that we forgot to mention here? You want to tell us a little bit more about Vinyl Camp, or I mean, you kind of covered that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a cool opportunity to learn more about how records are cut, and I do it mainly because before I knew how to do this, I would have been the person that would have wanted something like that to exist. So I'm providing that opportunity to anybody that's like me.
I would love to. You know, I've been here for the recording summit, and you've done many versions of that here, and it's really a blast. It's so much fun. I would like go out to the car and change and put on like a mustache and fake glasses and sign up for another one, come back in, you know, multiple times. All right, cool. Well, Rockstars, again, we're going to include links to all the stuff that we're talking about in the show notes. You can go to recordingstudiorockstars.com, or you can go to rsrockstars.com, and then you can just search Cameron Henry, and it'll take you straight to the blog post. Also, if you're listening on your iPhone, you can just open up the podcast app, and you should see the logo for Recording Studio Rockstars. Just touch the logo and it'll kind of disappear, and you'll see the show notes and link you straight to this stuff. So we'll have signups there for Vinyl Camp, for Recording Summit, stuff like that here. Welcome to 1979. And we'll see you guys in just a moment for the jam session. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks. And you get downloadable multitracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, Rockstars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Hey Rockstars, it's Lid Shaw, and you're listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. My guest today is Cameron Henry, vinyl mastering engineer at Welcome to 1979 Studio, and we're back, ready to go into the jam session. Cameron, are you ready to jam?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah, dude. All right, when you got started out in recording or mastering vinyl, what was one of the biggest things that was holding you back?
One of my biggest things was thinking that if only I had the ability to go into a real studio to make a record, then I would totally do that. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and had a Porta studio and 2 microphones, and would make records on that thing and then get my buddies over so we could go between the 2 of them. And at the time, I didn't realize that what I was doing was super awesome and important to understanding how recording actually works by just working with simple, antiquated, or semi-pro equipment. But there were times where I'm like, well, we could do this song, but we might need this other piece of gear to do it. And that's the wrong attitude to have. I eventually learned that.
Yeah. If somebody comes along and gives us this opportunity, then I'll do it.
Yeah.
That kind of attitude.
Right. That kind of, yeah. I think
like if you knew you could win the half marathon, then you'll start running around the blocks to train for it.
It's like you're defeating the purpose, of doing anything. Right.
Yeah. Good tip, man. How about some of the best advice that you received?
It's the same answer.
Yeah.
The best advice I received was like that exact
advice
same
I just
quote.
Gave you, dude. Come on. I'll look in the mirror.
I give myself my own best advice. No, since I worked on the Porta studios, it would be me recording myself in my garage, and I'd be focused on like, well, how close do I get the mic to the guitar, and how close do I get the mic to this, and blah, blah, blah. And somebody told me once, why don't you just sound good in the space you're in and put a microphone in the space and it should sound good, right? I'm like, yeah, totally. So I've always focused recording that way, is don't worry about where I'm going to put the mic first. Like, worry about making whatever's happening musically sound good just in the space that it's in. Like if you weren't recording it, if you're just going to listen to the performance in this room or whatever it is, that should sound good, first of all. And once that sounds good, you can put a microphone almost anywhere. It'll sound good. Then you can just focus on getting it better,
That reminded me of a song I did with Will Kimbrough once when we were doing his record at my place. And I had a similar idea, which was I sort of had this one room that had a bunch of organs in it, and it was a space where he might play and sing. And I just put one mic in one spot, and I said, let's build this entire song not moving the microphone.
Yeah.
So he went and he, like, when he played the piano, the mic stayed up front in the room. And so the piano sounded distant. When he played the organ or whatever, or played the, I don't know, we probably played a bunch of silly stuff, but, you know, and then he came up and sang on it or played the guitar, and it was pretty cool. It worked out, you know?
Yeah, I did this great rock record right when I first got my 1-inch 8-track. And they all want to play live. So we used 7 tracks to record the live take. And I intentionally left 1 track in case somebody wanted to put something else on the record. And then, you know, we listen to the playback and be like, oh, you know, we want to add like that tom roll's cool, but can we double it and make it sound weird? And then he needs to sing background vocals and he needs to play tambourine. And it's like, well, we have 1 track. So instead of miking up all those things and summing it, we put 1 Omni mic in the room and positioned all of those things to happen live, you know? So it's like, well, the tom needs to be louder, so move the tom closer to the mic, and the tambourine needs to take a step back and would mark the overdub. And then the overdub would be the entire band performing each of their individual things on 1 take. And all of a sudden the whole record sounded way cooler doing that, you know?
So I have a couple of anecdotes to go with that. One was the band, the Squirrel Nut Zippers, back in the 90s. I remember hearing that they, I think, tracked most of their songs with just one big RCA 44 out in the middle of the room. And same thing, like she had to, if she was singing, she was standing up close to the mic, and then the band just stood back. And I mean, basically that's just how recordings used to happen all the time. Bob Olson talked about that on the podcast, you know?
And I think that's lost on a lot of people, like technology in general. Technology is created way faster than we can existentially comprehend how to use it. You know what I mean? And I'm in some ways glad that I grew up in an era where I had a 3-track cassette Porta-Studio because one of the tracks didn't work. That was all I had, and living those limitations. So my microphone had to be, that's one thing I could be creative with. I didn't have the option to do all these different things. You know, I think there's something to having like 1 stereo live recording and a microphone or something, or a Porta-Studio. You know, if anybody's interested in recording, that's where they should start. They should just get a microphone and a thing to record it to and try to do as much as they can with that. Because once you start getting the options, it's like, oh, okay.
Well, the problem with the technology and the options and the multitracks is we have a tendency, I think, as human beings to automatically think that we need to be using them. Yeah. Right? It's like, you know, the store is a block from your house, but because you've got a car, you might forget and think you need to drive there.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and you know, the studio is analog based, but we have Pro Tools rigs here too. And we'll hear people say like, oh, that record that you guys did sounded so good. It's the tape machines. And we'll be, you know, talking to ourselves and say, well, that was actually never even hit a tape machine. That was all done in the box with tools. And it's not the equipment that sounded good. It was the process. Like I use Pro Tools the same way I use a tape machine, the same way I use the 3-track Porta-Studio. You know, it's how you use the equipment, not the equipment itself.
Yeah, and it's making the right choice so that your end result is something that sounds really good.
Yeah, it's just the philosophy of how you go about making records.
Wait a minute, is that the secret to making things sound really good? Is to just make them sound really good?
It's that simple.
Wow,
that's the secret.
All right, so now that goes into the next question, which is share a tip hack or secret sauce, a recording tip hack or secret sauce, something that listeners could use right now in recording.
I give this tip to a lot of people that are asking me, I'm going to mix this record for vinyl. What should I do? And I say, you know, put an EQ. Once you think your mix is good, put an EQ on your mix bus and put a high pass filter at like 60 or 70 hertz and a low cut filter at like 13K, or a low pass filter. So just take all that away, walk away for 15 minutes, and then go back and listen to it like that. And does it still sound like music to you? And if it does, then you're probably okay.
Wow, that's awesome that you said that.
Because those frequencies are the ones that you'll trick yourself into thinking are good. You're like, oh, I want that kick drum to really hit me in the face. It's like, really, you're just pumping a bunch of air at me. You know, it's lying to you. Like your music should, like
music happens between 60 hertz and 13K.
Well,
you know? A lot of music.
Like a great painting isn't a great painting because it was done on like a specific kind of canvas. It's a good painting because of what's on there. You know, like Starry Night is cool in person, sure, but I can look at a photograph of it on my cell phone and still understand that it's a great painting. It has nothing to do with the medium, so to speak, or like things that are extra to it. You know, the subsonics and the ultrasonics and all that stuff are great, for fidelity purposes, but you got to realize like the song needs to stand alone, even coming out of an earbud, right?
Well, it reminds me of something. I was just walking through my daughter's school the other day, and they had a whole series of what they called monochrome paintings on the wall. Yeah. And I always keep coming back to this when I think about painting. My mom was a oil painter, an artist, and so I, went to museums as a kid and stuff. And they would have these amazing paintings that were monochromatic. They might be just a series of shades of one color, and yet they were totally compelling. And I'm always looking for that in music. It's like, why do we think that music has to have the lowest lows and the highest highs in every song?
Sometimes it's not right. And what I do is technical, like the opposite of that is what I work in a very technical world, because mastering is kind of just built around that. But when I master a record, I, in my mind, join the band that I'm working on for that moment and really focus on what's actually coming out of the speakers, not sonically, but emotionally. What is this person singing about? Sometimes letting it be dark helps push the message. Sometimes making it bright when it has a dark message gives it an equal effect. Like it's like a weird, like manic sadness, and that's decisions I can make, just saying, what is this emotionally making me feel? How should this sound? And that's what makes work I do inherently mine.
Yeah, that's very cool. So it's interesting. Rock stars, remember, like, you've got a record and you want it pressed. You might think on the one hand that at the stage of vinyl mastering, it's I need to be a transparent window. But really, as it turns out, having a human being like Cameron here on the other end, really, and, putting his heart into it, like you put your heart into it, you're going to end up with something that translates really beautifully.
Yeah. 99% of the time, the source that I'm initially given isn't the same as what gets played on the record, because it just can't be, or it's not going to translate correctly. So a lot of what I do is cloak and dagger, where you think, where is the energy in this music really? And if I have to reshape it, where can I do that without changing the intention of the piece of music?
Yeah. And what's so great about it too is, in this case, for an artist to be able to have a dialogue with you too. It's like in the end, you get it right because you got the dialogue.
Yeah. And so this room is built for me to work alone, and we encourage people to come in, especially when they're doing their first record with me, labels and clients, like, look, let's be as hands-on now, and learn it. And you wouldn't just send off to a mastering engineer and not listen to it before sending to the CD manufacturer. Why would you?
Well, and let me clarify that, because you said work alone. So yeah, you can work alone in here, but there's a big comfy couch in the back of the room.
Yeah, there's a big couch, and coffee machines right
coffee.
there.
Yeah. So come on down to Welcome to 1979 and master your record. All right. So share with us a favorite hardware tool, something when you're, I don't know, going into the studio to make records or doing mastering here, something that you always like to have around.
A fun hardware tool is it's actually a unit by Behringer called the Combinator, and it's this multi-band limiter equalizer compressor that I think was initially intended for live purposes. So you could shape music to the room you're in.
I actually know it well.
It's an awesome piece of gear, and I'll bring it down here when we have it in the control room, usually upstairs, but I'm constantly grabbing that piece of gear to bring down into my room. We were doing some direct-to-disc party thing here a few weeks ago where a band threw a show on in the studio, and we cut the disc live, and someone walked in and there were these kids like, oh, wow, he's using a Behringer thing. And it's like, I'm telling you.
It's a secret weapon.
This thing is a cool sounding piece of gear,
We used to have that in the rack at Alex the Great. Well, there's the studio I started out at, just did an interview with Brad Jones. Every time I did a mix through, it sounded killer.
Well,
plus the other cool thing is you can look over and you see the lights and the different bands.
Yeah.
And if something's slamming, you might be pushing the wrong thing into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It'll tell you if you're faking yourself out. And it's really great for saying, I just want it to be, it should just be a little brighter, or it should just be a little warmer. Like you grab an equalizer and then you get that weird, like comb filtering sound. This thing is just very musical. So you can kind of shape something really quickly and have it sound like that was how it was supposed to be.
All right. I got to apologize to you rock stars because I'm going to hear this when I'm editing this again, moments before you do. And I'll be hitting eBay before you actually get this live on the podcast. The Combinator, maybe zipping off the shelves soon. Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows?
All right. So now how about a favorite software tool?
I really like Brainworks plugins. I use their BX Control, which is a mid-side digital, I guess it's more like a mastering quote unquote console, but it's just it's got a great device called a Mono Maker on it, which is emulated off of a elliptical equalizer that was intended for cutting discs, and it's just got a threshold point, like say 100 hertz. Everything below it is going to be summed to mono. Everything above it will remain stereo.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And so you can really and that's a good way if you're mixing for vinyl to make sure that you're getting your low end focus.
Very cool. And with Pro Tools, you can actually have the plugin output mid side. So you can put an instance of it at the top of your plugin chain. Everything below it, instead of being left, right, will be your left is the center and your right is the stereo image. So you can use multi-mono plugins and turn the left right link off and actually affect the side or the center independently.
Very cool.
And then you can put another instance of the Brainworks and have it input mid side and output stereo again, and you still have stereo coming out. So you have this little chain that's mid side. So if I have a record where, you know, the like it's really sibilant in the vocal, I can go in and de-ess that vocal in the middle without it affecting any cymbals or stereo stuff going on.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. And I imagine if you were in the creative stage of mixing, you could put effects just on the stereo stuff, you know, in a mix or something like that.
Yeah, which is also equally as cool, you know. It's you can really have fun EQing the stereo image. And it's fun to just solo. What's great is you can just hit sides and all of a sudden you're listening to your speakers and the center image just disappears, but you hear the left and right independent and you'd be like, oh wow, I hear the muddiness of my room. Let me filter that a bit.
Now, guys, reminder: don't send that mix straight to final cutting because it won't work.
I will not like that. Nobody will.
We need the middle. All right. So now, how about a great resource for the business side of doing what you do?
Wow, the business side.
You know, I mean, not everybody's trying to make a living doing recording and music, but many of us are. So, what do you use? What's something in your world that just sort of makes it go well?
Having a good invoicing software. I use this company called Invoice to Go, and it exists on my computer, exists on my phone, exists on my tablet. And then I can easily and quickly daily download the whole backlog. And so, and it generates reports in real time. So I can easily say, how much did I make? Who hasn't paid me? Who has paid me? Et cetera, et cetera. It's great to just keep track of all that. And I can do it no matter where I am. So if I get money from somebody on the street, like, oh, here's the $300 I owed you. It's like, okay, quickly, I can enter that.
So you got a phone app and it's online.
So like 6 months from now when I'm doing my taxes, and I'm like, why is my numbers not adding? Oh yeah, cool. I did get that money after all.
Good tip. Yeah. I love that kind of stuff for invoicing. It just makes
everything's
life so much easier.
Yeah.
And also if you are sending invoices to people, before software like that, you used to have to think, oh, did so-and-so not pay yet? And you're like, and you're going to have to send them a message now. And then you're like stressing because you're like, how am I going to word this carefully so I don't sound like a dick, you know, or whatever. Yeah. And now you just go on, you're like invoicing, you press one button. Okay, movie's start and put phone in my back pocket.
Like, you know? Thank you so much. Here's your invoice. Have a nice day. It's like, great.
It's great stuff.
Yeah.
Now this is sort of a hypothetical question, but if you imagine you were moving to a new city and you're starting over again and you need a simple setup to record with, you got to find people to record and make music with, plus you got to make ends meet so that you can, you know, survive while you're doing it. What advice would you have for somebody?
If it was me, before I would buy anything, I would find the bars that musicians are playing in, right? I mean, that's what I did when I moved to Nashville. I found the bars that musicians were playing in and started hanging out all the time, and then got to know them just personally by being there all the time over time. And then, what do you do? Oh, I'm a recording engineer. It's like, oh, really? Well, we've been looking about doing a record. It's like, well, what's your budget? Okay, cool. Well, I can go book the studio with that money, and you know, and then you can book a studio, or realizing what they need. Like maybe I don't need a lot of gear to record the bands that are here. You know, you got. It's like, it's not an if you build it, they will come situation.
Right.
You know,
if you go,
you got to find. Yeah, you got to find your client. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Find if there's people to even record, and then, you know, cater to that. You know, I'd love to start making records on a Porta studio again.
It was so much fun, you know, working with a 4-track because everything sounded cool.
Maybe we should just do that. We should just start a Porta studio sessions and just, you know, 3-track.
So I'm not sure how many of our listeners are familiar with Guided by Voices, but for example, they were sort of notorious when they first came onto the scene for doing their records on 4-tracks and having this cool different sound. I think even Ween did a lot of their first records on 4-track, Chocolate or something like that, early stuff. And just, it was fun, you know?
Yeah.
You just you spend all your time thinking about musical decisions instead of getting too hung up in gear.
Yeah. I mean, I remember using the Porta Studio and like I've listened to some of those recordings recently and been like, wow, I can't believe it sounded so good. At the time I thought this was awful because I didn't really know that I was doing was okay. But I remember the day it's like, oh, we want more instrument, but we're out of tracks. Well, what if I patch this output into that input and re-record it through? And like thought I'd like, oh, this is mind blowing.
Because at the time, then it went up in smoke, and you're like, well, I guess.
Well, then I'm like,
this
is great. I'm submixed. I have unlimited tracks. Like, wow, I've just like, tweaked the system. I've modified it. And then I found the Beatles book. I'm like, oh, they were doing this like 50 years ago. Like, oh, well, never mind.
That's awesome.
I'm not the genius I thought I was.
All right. So final question, man. And this is the doozy, the whopper. What's the single most important thing that our listeners should do to become a rock star of the recording studio themselves?
Record things.
Good answer.
Things.
Record stuff.
Record stuff.
If you want to be good at recording stuff, record
stuff. And that's true. Everybody's bad at one point. You don't start off good. Like playing an instrument. Like the best way to learn to play piano is to play piano, right? The best way to get good at recording people is record things. Did
you do a lot of just record when you started out?
Yeah. I mean, I was in Toledo and it was a hobby, I was going to school for psychology or something and I was playing with a few people, and then I just started recording myself for fun. And then, a buddy would say, "Oh, this band they're looking to do something in their basement." I'm like, well, I'll just take all my Porta Studio crap that's in my bedroom to their basement. And then I sort of ended up with a duffel bag studio.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Where's your band practice?" "Cool. How much is it going to cost?" I'm like, "Well, how about you guys give me $50 or you got a bottle of whiskey there for me and you guys just play where you practice and I'll just record it." And then
you guys got pizza and beer. I'm there.
Yeah. I mean, that was really a hobby at first. And then, started thinking, well, maybe this could be a career. I don't know. I'd like to at least give it a shot. And then realized where I was geographically that there was no industry, that I would constantly have to have a real job, no matter how good I got or how much gear I bought. I would still have to have a real job because that's just the city of Toledo, Ohio. So I moved to Nashville, where at least there was an opportunity because more people were just here doing that.
I was doing something similar when I started, had a 4-track, had a bunch of adapters and cables and stuff like that. And remember when you had that stuff, you actually, in your head, you could list off all the stuff you owned back then?
Yeah. I could list off that I owned it. I couldn't always list off where it was located.
Unless it was in the duffel bag.
Yeah.
But I remember having this sense that the thing that defined me as an engineer at that point was just that I simply knew how to hook up the multiple Radio Shack adapters to get the microphone into the 4-track.
Yep.
And press record.
Oh, yeah. And then Phantom Power didn't work, so I had a separate mixer. I'm like, well, I'm going to need Phantom Power for that, so I need to plug it into that thing just to get Phantom Power to send it to that thing.
Phantom Power, dude, you were fancy, man. We did. All I had was, dynamic mics.
Well, I had
one.
I got a microphone for writing a paper for somebody in college, for a general music class. He's like, I just can't write papers. I was like, and then he had these microphones he was trying to sell. And I was like, you give me that microphone, I'll write your stupid 5-page paper. Yeah.
That's great, man.
And like, yeah, so that was my first condenser microphone, which blew my mind because like now I bought it and then it wouldn't work. And so I went to the guitar store and I was like, this microphone doesn't work. Like, could I trade it in for a working one? Not knowing that they'd be like, get out of here. And he plugged it in and it worked. I'm like, oh, okay. And then went home, it didn't work. And then I'm like, oh, I need a Phantom Power. Like, what the hell is that? It's something I don't have, so I have to figure out a way to make this work.
Yeah, I remember when I first discovered Phantom Power and mentioned it to my friends, they thought it was the coolest thing that ever. They're like, Phantom Power?
I'm like,
what kind of word is that?
Yeah, I'm like, is it like fake power? Is it like ghost power? Yeah.
That's your superhero name.
Yeah, Ghost
Phantom
Power.
Ghost Power.
Yeah, Phantom Power. Yeah.
All right, so hey, Cameron, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Really cool stuff, man. We could probably just keep going. Should we start all over and do another 70 minutes of chat?
Let's do part 2. Yeah.
How can listeners find you and learn more about what you're doing? And if they want to reach out to you or something?
Yeah, I mean, if you're on Facebook, you can just go to the Welcome to 1979 Facebook page, and I'm on there. Welcome to 1979.com. There's a vinyl tab, and there's just some basic info about disc cutting and a price sheet and a really cool, click through, choose your own adventure. What are vinyl records, and try to answer a lot of the basic questions that a lot of people have. So if you're curious about any of that, start clicking through. And then I can be emailed at mastering@welcome to 1979.com if anybody wants to
And just to make
hello.
it easy on you, you don't have to spell out 1979 too. Just use the numbers.
You can just use the numbers.
And 2 is spelled out.
Yeah.
Welcome TO.
Welcome TO1979.com.
Nice. And then am I remembering correctly that you guys also have some sort of mastering package that involves like a glass of whiskey in your hand in the back of the room or something?
Well,
was that once upon a time?
No, we still do. We have 3 tiers of vinyl mastering. Instead of having everything be a la carte and confusing, it's kind of like, I hate to use this analogy because it dumbs it down, but
here comes
it's like
Apple analogy.
But it's like value meals. You know what I mean? Like, I know I want the,
McDonald's.
So we have the basic package, which is for a lot of my repeat customers that kind of already know what I'm going to do, called the High Life, the champagne of beers, but it's beer. And then our middle tier that comes with some more nice options is the red wine. And then the ultimate vinyl mastering package is like, if you really want to nerd out and have like the best sounding record you can have, you go for our single malt whiskey option.
Nice, man.
Yeah, just like when you choose your own drink, like the end result is going to be the end result, but the journey is a big part of it.
It's all about the journey. Awesome, dude. Well, once again, thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing more of you and see you at Vinyl Camp.
Absolutely, man.
Rockstars, come on to Nashville. Come to Vinyl Camp. You'll find out all about it on the website. Get the dates there.
Absolutely.
This is a repeat item.
Yeah.
All right, cheers.
Hey, thanks, Lidge.
See you around the studio. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.